Okay, some exciting fight news. Conor McGregor seems set on having Dan Hooker as a return opponent on February in Saudi. Some people say McGregor's not coming back. He seems all over the place. But I'm going to be positive and let's try break down this fight, shall we? Now, February is a good date for you people who have the upcoming elections in Canada and America. Some heated politics there, I gather. If it doesn't go your way, we have some really good fights coming up. UFC 308 with Holloway and Topuria, Whittaker versus Chimaev, Jones versus Miocic, Chandler versus Oliveira rematch. It goes on, and then a possible McGregor return next year to cap it off. Good stuff to get your minds off politics. Hopefully the UFC has a new boom period, as this year was lackluster. But I'll be breaking down these fights on my channel, so stay tuned, subscribe and so on. Anyway, back to this fight. But before I do start now, this annoying guy, Ruben Carter on Twitter or X, he tricked me with Jamal Hill versus Yuri Prohaska being officially signed for UFC 311 in January. I made a whole video breakdown and just went to check if it's actually signed, but turns out he's a troll. I don't know what you're playing at, Ruben Carter on X, but that's crazy. I wasted so much time doing all that. Anyway, moving on, but just watch what you see when you see a post from a guy or anyone on Twitter now. You'll get hyped for fights that ain't happening. So, an obvious mark against Conor is he's been out since 2021 now. He also pulled out of that Chandler fight for a broken toe. But I'm telling you now, a broken toe, I think it was a pinky toe even, isn't a pull out of the fight injury. It was 2 weeks out and it takes a week to heal up. About 80% of the camp is over at that point. You tape it up and focus on boxing for a week. Do cardio, not involving running or the legs. Then last week of camp, you're mainly focusing on the weight cut. It's fully healed by the time of the fight. You're always going to get some injury in camp, and a broken toe is the best one to get, if anything. You see how Alex Pereira broke his toe and laughed it off. 2 weeks out is also the perfect time. I think he was on drugs and drink, kept saying he'd get off it next week, then suddenly he was 2 weeks out and still on it, so pulled the plug. So if he's been on it that heavy, you have to wonder what he's going to look like in his comeback fight. Now Dan Hooker, he's been training and fighting. He hit a big downturn in his career after the war with Poirier. Took some dumb fights on short notice, but he's looking back in the groove after he beat Jalen Turner and Matthias Gamrot. This could be his renaissance. He's young enough to have a comeback. Now Dan Hooker is very durable. McGregor, since moving up from featherweight, lost that touch of death. He's not able to levy the frame and leverage of the punch over smaller guys like before. The extra 15 pounds guys have now at lightweight allow them to take the shot better. Let's look at the KOs Conor has above featherweight. Donald Cowboy Cerrone, who had been knocked out by Gaethje a few months prior, and Eddie Alvarez, who Conor had a big frame advantage over him, and still Eddie was able to recover multiple times despite being hit with that KO shot a bunch of times. I mean, Dustin Poirier, who McGregor KO'd beforehand at featherweight, was able to take the punches in the rematch at lightweight. We were seeing these warning signs with Eddie and Nate Diaz of guys being able to take McGregor's shots better, but we all brushed it off at the time. So how is McGregor going to be able to KO Dan Hooker? I don't see it. Then if it goes in the latter rounds, how is McGregor going to have that cardio? The damage from the alcohol and such, and the nerves from being out for such a long time, Dan's going to have the advantage in the long run. McGregor would need to put on so much damage on Dan in the early rounds that he's a wounded animal in the latter, akin to the Nate Diaz rematch, then tougher out until decision, which Dan, being a pretty sharp striker, not as sharp as he was in the past, but still a sharp striker. And then I think Dan has the height, and I think he may have the longer arms. He has the 1 inch reach advantage, but arm length is a different metric. Conor has freakishly long arms. It's harder for McGregor to land his counters against bigger guys, and punching down is easier than punching upwards. As we saw with Deontay Wilder versus Tyson Fury in boxing, Wilder didn't have as much power as with other opponents because he was constantly punching upwards. Compared with Chandler, much smaller than McGregor, swings wide looping punches that McGregor can counter easily, shaky chin, not great cardio, relies on explosion and athleticism. McGregor is technically better. He's a bit of a Chad Mendes, but Chad is more technical than Chandler. Now this win has a huge upside in that it's going to be a much more respected win than Chandler, as Chandler has been on the downside and hasn't fought in a while. Dan has been active and is fresh off 2 big wins, so while it's risky, this is a fight where people would be okay with a title shot for McGregor. So I can see why McGregor would opt for Dan Hooker. If he wants that big explosive comeback, though I'd say fight Chandler and then fight Dan Hooker for your best chances at winning against Islam or whoever's going to be the champion at the time, probably Islam. Then you could get the title shot. But if he wants one fight and a title, maybe he knows he's at the end of his career and needs to do it fast. One thing I'd like to see from Conor is no more interviews where he's obviously on something. From now to February, a lot of videos of him training, show us him sparring and uncut to see if he's still got it. Then people can start to believe in him again. Anyway, let me know what you think about the matchup. Any concerns about it? I'd be glad to read the comments. I'm out anyway.